interstate commerce because you chose not to sell it on the interstate market. But from those decisions, we've kept widening and widening, and now we have sort of the Gonzales v. Reich decision where they say California wants to allow medical marijuana, and the federal government comes in and says, oh, no, that defies the Commerce Clause also because that marijuana looks like other marijuana that could be sold interstate. So therefore, even though you're growing it, your own plants, and using it for medicinal uses, that somehow qualifies as interstate commerce. So we became to a ridiculous point where there are really no constitutional restraints anymore, and that's what we need to turn back the page on and begin to realize that we need to have constitutional restraints, not only in the economy like with the Commerce Clause, but with the War Declaration Clause.
Well, and that's a very important point and really leads to my next question. If you're running in a Republican primary, there's going to be a lot of heat about your position on war, and your choice then will be either to moderate your position and sound a little bit more Republican on foreign policy issues to try to appease them, or to do like I've seen your father do with his constituency down there in District 14 in South Texas. At one of the barbecues there, I think it was in 2004, I saw your father explain to a very pro-war constituency at his birthday barbecue bash there that, listen, I know that you people respect George Bush. I know, he's from Texas. You want to stand by and support the troops. I know that you think, patriotism is at stake here. Our freedom is at stake here. But I'm just here to tell you that's not my view. I'm a peacenik, and here's why, and here's what you need to understand. And if you disagree with me, that's okay. If you don't think I represent you, that's okay. But that's where I stand, and that's how I'm always going to vote. And he explained Robert Pape and the causes of suicide, terrorism, and the rest of it. And as you well know, he continues to be reelected in that Republican district. In fact, was even reelected just 2 weeks after voting against the Iraq War because he stands on his principle. Is that the model that you're going to follow when it comes to heated debates on the issues of war and peace in these Republican primaries?
Yeah, and I think probably I tell people in my speeches that the most important vote that any congressman or senator ever has is on war and peace. And while other issues are of great importance, nothing is more important than sending a young person to war. And so I think there is nothing more important or more grave. And had I been in the Senate during the debate over Afghanistan or over Iraq, I would have forced a vote on declaration of war. One of the greatest things I think my father did in that whole debate was, in the International Affairs Committee, he made them vote on a declaration of war. And it was interesting the responses you got. I think at the time the chairman was a Republican, and he looked at my dad and said, Ron, that part of the Constitution's an anachronism. We don't pay attention to that anymore. And the leading Democrat on the committee says, Ron, you're just making frivolous arguments here. And so that's sort of the way they address it, is that they think it's all about power and majority and democracies and has nothing to do with the rule of law. But had I been in the Senate, I would have held things up. Now, I do tell people, and I think this is it's important to tell people your position, but I think this is also something that can be accepted in a Republican primary, is that I would have forced a vote on declaration of war in both cases, but I probably would have voted for declaration of war with Afghanistan, and I would have voted against declaration of war with Iraq. So I think that not only is that my position, I think that's an acceptable position in a Republican primary.
Mm-hmm. Well, are you taking into account there the fact that the Taliban offered to turn Osama bin Laden over if we just provided a little bit of evidence? They would have given him up to any Muslim government, I think it was, or at least any Arab government to be tried in the region, things like that. Was it necessary to declare war against the Taliban, which, after all, tried to send their foreign minister to warn us of an impending attack by al-Qaeda?
I think that some of the details on there are worthy of consideration, and whether or not they were willing to turn over bin Laden would have been a big decision in declaration of war. But I didn't see any evidence that they were rounding up bin Laden and turning him over. It took us about a month to go in, and I think during that month you have that debate and you have that discussion, and if they were willing to do that. But in the end, they fought hand in hand with bin Laden, so I think to separate the Taliban as out as being some force that really diplomacy would have worked with, I think was probably a mistaken notion.
Well, of course, we're occupying Afghanistan now, and our war has morphed from a war against al-Qaeda into a war against the Taliban, and in fact, according to many experts I talked to on this show, into a war against the Pashtuns. And the fact that the American occupying force likes to call anyone who resists Taliban notwithstanding, what's happened is basically the entire Pashtun tribal system on both sides of the Afghan-Pakistan border is resisting our occupation. Is it okay for us to now differentiate between them and al-Qaeda, or do we have to defeat all the Pashtun tribes?
Yeah, no, I think that the idea of having a 10-year war that goes on, you eventually, when you occupy a country, you run into more and more problems that I would not have been in favor of. And in fact, I think when you decide to declare war, you have to also decide how to end war. And, I would not be in favor of a long-term occupation of, Iraq or Afghanistan.
Okay. Now, you speak of the rule of law. What's your position on torture and on war crimes prosecutions for the many torturers in the previous administration?
I'm opposed to torture, and I think our country should have a higher ideal than that. And I would oppose it and would make that part, it actually officially is part of our Army manual not to do it. We just don't pay attention to our own rules. But, I think that torture is always wrong and shouldn't be performed.
Well, and what about prosecutions and official investigations? In fact, a student of the Constitution, as I know you are, the Constitution says that any treaties ratified by the Senate are the law of the land. Nothing in the federal law or the Constitution, notwithstanding, not that there's a conflict in this case, I don't think. American federal law and the Constitution seem to be in harmony, if not, word for word the same. There doesn't seem to be a conflict between them and our international obligations, which mandate official investigations into credible accusations of torture. They don't say if you feel like it. They say if you don't do it, we will.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm in favor of, trying George Bush in some kind of trial for torture. I don't know that does good for the country, or I think it ended up being more of a political question than it ended up being whether or not you can try a political leader. And there are some arguments for whether or not a president can be tried for things like that. With regard to, if you take it back and you look at a specific instance like Abu Ghraib, where there was torture and inappropriate behavior by guards, I think it was a mistake there that the only people they tried were the enlisted people right around them. I think there's no way that there were not officers, at least within that cell block, that had to have knowledge of what was going on, and if not, giving directions to it. So I think they whitewash a lot of things like that. I think it's harder to decide if you're going to try a soldier at Guantanamo who does this under direct orders. Is it that person that should be tried or the person that gives the orders? And if the orders went all the way up to the chain to either Dick Cheney or George Bush, should they be tried for it? I don't think that is good for the country, probably, and I don't think that that's going to occur.
Oh, well, I don't think anybody thinks it's going to occur, but it leaves us with a moral dilemma, doesn't it, when, and as is revealed and as he admits on TV more and more every day, Dick Cheney ordered this stuff. And as you say, low-level guards at Abu Ghraib prison, they're in jail right now. They're in prison right now for what they've done. And all the lies of the last few years notwithstanding, we know it's in the paper trail. We know for a fact that George Bush and Dick Cheney are the ones who ordered this. Dick Cheney accused or, invoked George Bush as being in on every bit of it on TV just the other day. So,
right. Well, and the other problem is that it gets even bigger than that, in the sense that all the leaders, both of Republican and Democrat, are complicit in just about everything that happened, because, Pelosi now plays games with did she know or didn't she know about these interrogation techniques. Mm-hmm. My guess is that the leaders of all the intelligence committees, as well as the congressional leaders on both sides, knew very well of all the things that were going on. They knew most about these wiretaps. I mean, for goodness sakes, the greatest irony, and it just makes me laugh and think it's just hilarious, is that Jane Harmon got caught up in the wiretapping when she was a big proponent of it, And I think it serves her right, but shows also how, if she truly is innocent, how innocent people get caught up in wiretapping. But that's the way it was. The Republicans and the Democrats at high levels supported and at least knew that Bush had given these orders to allow torture to occur.
Mm-hmm. Well, but now what